Alright, the purpose of this video is to give some information regarding the agricultural exception that just came out regarding expansion of when you can haul under the agricultural exception as it relates to hours of service. I'm your speaker. My name's John Seidel. I used to be a state patrol inspector in the state of Wisconsin. I was an investigator with the federal government, took fines and penalties against companies. I basically took enforcement and issued conditional ratings, etc. if companies didn't follow the hours of service. So the purpose of this video is to provide you some information so you do follow the hours of service, specifically using the agricultural exemption. So this is the actual regulation. 395.1K is agricultural operations. It breaks it into three categories, as you can see here. Number 1, number 2, number 3. Number 2 and number 3 are farm supplies. What I'm about to talk about today has no bearing on the exemption that pre-existed regarding the movement of farm supplies within the 150 air miles. So everybody that's listening to this, focus on agricultural commodities from a source. That's a key term, source. You can operate and be exempt from the hours of service within 150 air miles, which it isn't regulatory, written in the regulation, but it's basically accepted that 150 air miles is equivalent to 172 and a half statute miles. That means physical address to physical address on a road. That's what you're subject to. And again, it's from the source. So we're going to talk about basically what it says today and how you can use this to your advantage. A lot of confusion out there right now. We're trying to quell that. So a few weeks ago, they came out with a new guidance, which are in the form of questions and answers, trying to explain what this new agricultural exemption allows. So it applies to drivers while driving unloaded, meaning you can't have any freight within 150 air miles to a place where agricultural commodities will be loaded. So if you are going to a place with agricultural commodities and you are unloaded going to that place, you are exempt from the hours of service, meaning you can be off duty if you're within 150 air miles. Now, if you take a trip and you deliver and you're coming back, it also applies to the unloaded return trip. As long as you're going back to where that original agricultural commodity was loaded, or you're going back to another place where it is going to be determined to be a source of the agricultural commodity. So what does it basically say? It says that you can use off-duty time if you're transporting agricultural commodities from the source, and none of the requirements of Part 395 apply. We're going to show you like a visual example using maps in a bit. The second question says, does the agricultural commodity exemption apply if the destination is beyond 150 air miles? So in the past, as long as you stayed in a circle 150 air miles from the source, which is equivalent to 172 and a half statute miles, all that time was off duty. Now they're saying, what if you pick up in your source and it's outside of the 150 air mile, i.e. 172 and a half statute mile location from the source where you're delivering? Can you do that? And the answer is yes. It applies only during the initial 150 air miles. So if you pick up from a source and you're driving to a location outside of the source, that first 150 air miles can be off duty, and all activity that occurs after the 150 air miles, 172 and a half statute miles, then applies to Part 395 as it says right here. And then when you're driving and you deliver and you come back, you are eating up your 11, your 14, your 30-minute break. You need 10 hours off just like you normally would under the hours of service. However, if you cross back within the area that was 150 air miles from the original source of the commodity, that becomes off duty again. So now, that's a lot of words and that's a lot of information that you can sift through. We're going to be sending out, with the link to this YouTube channel, an additional document that outlines what the exception says from front to back. If all you do is see this video and you don't have the original information, my phone number's on the top. You can call me and I'll send you the original guidance. So we're going to do a real example. Let's say you're picking up agricultural commodities at Seneca Foods at 7757 Airport Road in Manito, Illinois, right? That is this location on the map. So 150 air miles is represented in the red in this location. If you stay within this 150 air miles, which is this red circle, all that time's off duty. But in this scenario, let's say we're delivering up into Wisconsin. I'm going to do a real focused view of this. As you drive up towards Wisconsin, you'll see that there's an exit here at Highway 43 and 81. At this exit, there's a Pilot, there's a Walmart. If you look at the very top of this screen, you can see where that original red circle borders. That's the 150 air miles. So if you pick up at Seneca Foods and you drive north up towards Rockford, right before you get to the edge of the red circle, which is represented here, you can exit and go to the Pilot Travel Center at 3001 Milwaukee Road in Beloit, which is identified on this map. This Pilot Travel Center is 170.8 miles, as you can see right here. 170.8 miles from the original location. It's approximately 3 hours of driving. Let's just say 3 hours. So what did this driver do? He picked up at this original location for Seneca Foods, drove 3 hours to this exit. After he gets to this exit, he switches from agricultural exempt to his full 14-hour day, which, by the way, is at the Pilot in a safe location, approximately 1.5 miles from the 172.5 you're allowed. So you're switching to your 14-hour day just inside the circle. Now you go from there and you proceed from the Pilot up to Seneca Foods in Cumberland. Your 11-hour driving day, your 14-hour day, the requirement for a 30-minute break will start at the Pilot truck stop. You'll record the hours all the way up to Seneca Foods in Cumberland as you would any other activity that is not ag exempt. You deliver there, take your 30-minute break, and in this case, it's, let's say it's a drop and hook. You'll drive from the Pilot to Seneca, drop and hook, take a 30-minute break, and drive back. How much time will that chew up towards your 11 and 14? If you run the original, the location for the Pilot on Milwaukee Road to the location in Cumberland, it's approximately 4.5 hours of driving. That means you drive 4.5 hours up as part of your hours of service day, take a 30-minute break, drop and hook, and drive 4.5 hours back. That'll put you at about 9 hours of driving, and it will put you with about 9.5 to 10 hours towards your 14-hour day. Once you come back inside this circle, the return trip back to Seneca Foods at the address listed above will all be off duty. So what does that mean? Let's just summarize this as a whole. You can pick up at this address right here on this slide, drive approximately 3 hours to the Pilot off duty, then start your workday under the 395 hours of service, and your 11-hour, 14, your 30-minute break would start at the Pilot truck stop. Then you go up to Cumberland, up into Wisconsin, on a 9-hour driving return trip, which is under the 11. You take a 30-minute break because you need your 30-minute break, which you obtain. Then once you get back to the Pilot, you will switch your log back to ag exempt at the safe location. Then you'll proceed that 3 hours back to this location. So what did you ultimately do? You drove for 3 off duty, then drove for 9.5 that was on duty driving. Then you took a 30-minute break, came back, then you drove 3 more hours off duty. You did almost a 17, 18-hour day. How many hours do you need back off at this location? 4, because you will have 3 hours from the Pilot to this location, a 4-hour break, then you will load and go 3 hours back up. That is your 10-hour break. So you can make this round trip run once every 24 hours, staying within the 11, the 14, and the 30-minute break. You will obtain your 10-hour break with 3 hours of it being driving off duty under the ag, a legitimate 4-hour break, then 3 more hours off duty driving back to the Pilot. Now I will warn you, when you do this activity, if you're fatigued, don't do it. Because there's another section in the regulations saying you can't operate ill or fatigued. Just because this allows you to have an exemption that you can take some of your off-duty time in the driving status does not mean you can operate fatigue. So now, the next big key to this is the source. What's the source of the product? In prior guidance, the source was basically from the field. Wherever it was harvested from is the source. Well, now they've changed that slightly. They're saying as long as you're loading agricultural onto an unladen commercial vehicle with no freight, you may have that source be an intermediate storage or handling location from the original source. This is the big sentence. As long as the original form of that agricultural commodity is not significantly changed. That means a head of lettuce is a head of lettuce. A cranberry is a cranberry. A bean is a bean. But if you take a cranberry and you process it into juice, then it no longer has its original form and it is significantly changed. The other piece that you have to understand is if you're picking up in multiple locations, the first location will be that first trip as outlined in this red section right here. That first trip starts the source. You're going to the second location with product, which means you're not going there unladen, meaning no freight. So you can't make 5 trips and say you have 5 sources. The original trip of that load will be the first location. So to bring this home with an example, let's say that you're picking up heads of lettuce that are stored at a secondary location from the field. As long as they retain their original form, that secondary location, which would be like an intermediate storage or handling facility, can be your source even if you're not the one that picked it up from the original location. Another example would be grain is collected and dried. It may be the source at the elevator if the grain is not milled and similarly processed. So if you have a head of lettuce that came from the field and now it's at a storage facility or a processing place, but it maintained its original form and is not significantly changed, that can be another source setting the 150 air mile radius location over again. This is a big change, and I'll tell you, if anything is questionable as to whether or not you're going to be in violation or not, the application of what is and is not a source is one in which you have to pay very close attention to in following this guidance. Now, this guidance question is the last one. There's 4 of them. Question number 34, 35, 36, 37. This is the last one. It says that multiple pickups of the commodity en route to the final destination, again, only the first place that you went to unladen can be used as the source. Any secondary pickups still have to stay within 150 air miles of the source to be considered off-duty while working. So now, I hope this didn't confuse anybody. It is a confusing guidance. What we need to do now is if anybody has any questions, you can call me on the original slide up at the top and I'll walk you through this a little closer, provide you the actual guidance. Everybody be safe and keep on trucking.